First things first, in the United States, and I think as well as other places, we realize that one of the things that people are trying to do, corporations, is they're trying to solve new problems solve new problems with old solutions. So the problem is that you can't solve new problems with old solutions. You need to come up with new solutions for new problems. So what I'm going to encourage everybody here to do is to think outside the box. And thinking outside the box means this is where we normally are. We have to think new ideas and new thoughts in order to solve the new problems that we have. So let's take a look at things. These are the places I've been over the last couple of years to speak to audiences like you all around the globe. And it doesn't matter if I'm in Amsterdam or Cairo or Santiago or Sao Paulo. All of the consumers that I see in these countries have a lot of things in common, and the businesses have a lot in common too. So the problems that we're facing here in Sao Paulo today are the same ones that I'm talking to people in Dubai about, and talking to people in London about, and talking to people in Bogota about. And the reason for that is because the world is getting smaller. What do I mean by that? Let's take a look at things. Today, information travels around the globe faster than ever. So if something happens in New York City, instantly it's in Sao Paulo and Dubai and Amsterdam because of the internet. So information now travels the globe very, very quickly. So with that in mind, I said, let me take a look at how long it used to take information to travel around the globe. And here's what we found. In 1750, it took 3 months for information to travel from Sao Paulo to Europe by clipper ship. In 1885, it took 3 weeks for information to travel from Sao Paulo to Europe by steamship. In 1935, it took 3 seconds for information to travel from Sao Paulo to Europe by telegraph. And today, it takes 3 nanoseconds, that's a millionth of a second, for information to travel from Sao Paulo to Europe by the internet. So the bottom line is that suddenly we're finding ourselves with information that goes around the globe very, very rapidly. And the result is that we've found ways that we can learn from one another and apply things that we learn in New York and San Francisco and Dubai and London and Sao Paulo and Santiago and apply it to all of our businesses, because consumers are the same all around the globe, and the businesses that are having challenges with their consumers are the same around the globe as well. So the rise of digital and internet has created 3 significant challenges for business, and that's what we're going to talk about today, are the challenges and then also the solutions around those challenges. The first challenge is that the consumer attention is being spread across more and more media. So this gentleman that you're seeing here 30 years ago had a few TV stations, a newspaper, and radio to get information. Today, there's 640 different sources of information, and so their attention is fragmented and it's being spread across many, many, many media. There's 200 cable channels, there's 200 different social media platforms, there's 100 different ways to get information online. All of this adds up to fragmented attention for our consumers. In 2019, 63% of those surveyed in Brazil cited TV as their #1 source of information. This is down 20% since 2014. And the reason for that is because people are watching TV, but then they're going online and they're going to all these different sources for their information. 26% of Brazilians list the internet as their #1 source of information, which has doubled since 2014. That's followed by radio at 7%, newspaper with 3%, other media, for example, outdoor magazines and others, are at 1%. In other parts of the world, consumer attention is fragmented at an even higher rate than it is here in Brazil. In the United States, traditional TV viewing is off 41% for consumers between the ages of 12 and 24, and it's off 29% for consumers between the ages of 25 and 34. So consumer attention is being spread across more media than ever before. Now let's take a look at the second problem that businesses are facing. The quality of consumer attention is declining. This woman who is on her smartphone right now is talking to somebody on Instagram, is doing WhatsApp messaging, is having a phone conversation with her mother, is also uploading to Facebook. All of these things are making her attention fragmented, but that means the quality of her attention is reducing as well. So suddenly, not only are we struggling to get the attention in the first place, but when we get it, the attention is very, very short. So she's sitting there and she does this, and then she does that, and then she does that, and all of this is changing and going around. So here's a quote from Thales Teixeira, CEO of Decoupling. He reports that the percentage of ads fully watched until the end has decreased from 90% in the 1990s to less than 20% today. So that gives us the sense that the quality of attention is declining. Now here's something interesting. Dr. Teixeira was a professor at Harvard and also received his master's degree right here at the University of Sao Paulo. So he's an authority around the globe about how people engage with media and how that's fragmenting right now and causing a lot of problems. So the other thing, the third point I want to make here is that customer loyalty is at an all-time low. Now for all of the businesses here, what we're trying to do is grab the attention of these young ladies and try to get them to come by our store or buy our telecom information or tune into our TV channels, and we're struggling because we're all of a sudden realizing that once we get them as a customer, they can switch over to other brands very, very quickly. So McKinsey did a study, and according to McKinsey, 21% of Brazilian consumers said they traded down to less expensive brands versus 12% globally. Of those, 60% said they don't intend to go back to the more expensive brand. So customer loyalty is at an all-time low. We're able to switch, we're able to talk about the brands that we're dealing with, and that has made this problem bigger and bigger and bigger. So those are the three main things that we're facing. The impact of this is that 90 of the top 100 consumer packaged goods brands are losing market share. That means Pepsi, Dove, Magi, Colgate, Coca-Cola, Nescafe, and Knorr, along with almost 100 other ones, are starting to lose market share because they're struggling with the three things that we just talked about: media fragmentation, less quality attention, and low customer loyalty means that these problems are impacting the largest businesses that we have. So it is a big problem for everybody in this room and for all of these brands here. So how do we solve that problem? Well, that's what we're going to talk about today. How can we take action on this? Let's start by taking a look at the cycles all businesses go through during their lifetimes, and then we'll take a look at the action steps they need to take in order to succeed. So as I mentioned before, I go around the globe and I talk to a lot of different businesses, and one of the things that I've found is that all businesses go through four stages. They launch the product, they go through a peak, they have a fall, and then they ultimately, most of them, recover. Kodak invented the digital camera. Now, as you know, the digital camera is what put Kodak out of business. So how did a company that invented the digital camera end up going out of business as a result of it? Well, here's what happened. Kodak went in, as we know. They had their launch, they had their peak, they had their fall. But the reason they didn't recover is because they didn't think outside the box. True story. Kodak went in the early 1970s, and they invented the digital camera to help the United States spy on Russia. And so what they did was they put the digital camera stuff into satellites, and instead of sending film back down, which you couldn't do, they said, we want to make it digital so that we can get the information. So Kodak came up with the idea of, here's how we can do this digitally. The problem was they weren't thinking outside the box. What they did was they said, wow, here's a digital camera. If we right now make an 80% profit margin from film. 80%. If any of us in this room have an 80% profit margin, you can retire tomorrow, because that's very, very uncommon. So they're sitting around there going, we make 80% with our film, or we can introduce this new thing called the digital camera and we'll make 20% profit margin. And they said, we aren't going to do that. We don't want to go ahead and do a 20% profit margin. So they didn't reinvent themselves, and the result is that they collapsed and ended up there. Now, a couple of other companies have gone through this same cycle. Microsoft launched, peaked in the 1990s, went down the tubes a little bit in the early 2000s, but now they're recovering because the new CEO is coming in and reinventing Microsoft. Now, the next slide is a highly controversial one. There's a brand out there that everybody thinks is doing great, and I'm here to tell you today that they're actually on the back end of their peak. Let's take a look at it. It's Apple. Believe it or not, Apple, in my opinion, is right here. Why? Because 61% of Apple's revenues come from one product, the iPhone. 61% comes from one product. That's a big problem for a company. What happens when Huawei out of China starts introducing their own phones, which they are? That 61% starts to drop. How many people in here have realized that Apple has stopped innovating, right? It used to be Apple invented things like the iPhone and the iPad and iTunes. Today, Google is getting inside your home with Google Home. Amazon is getting inside your home with Alexa. Even Uber and other companies are reinventing all sorts of things with their innovation. So Apple, I think personally, is in trouble. So we've seen the problems that businesses have. Now let's talk about the action steps that you can take going away from here tomorrow when you get back to the office. These are the things that I want you to be thinking about so that you take action on what we're doing. Let's take a look at this. We're going to look at a lot of different things today. We're going to start out on the tactical side of the basis, and then we're going to move over to the strategic side. We're also going to talk about short-term solutions that you can do immediately versus long-term solutions that will take a little bit longer for you to execute. And I'm going to divide them into 4 different categories so that we can talk about them and wrap our minds around them and go ahead and make sure that they work for your business. We're going to start with the long-term and strategic quadrant. These are big picture strategies that you can use that will take a long time to execute. This is not something that happens overnight. It's something that you start today, and in a year or 2, you start seeing the results. Let's take a look at it. Action step number 1, embrace artificial intelligence. Google Images uses AI for image recognition. Did I hear a lot of, "aw, puppy dogs"? Is that what I heard? That's great. If you do a search for photograph of a puppy, Google puts up a bunch of photographs on the screen for you. Now, what we don't know is that Google is using artificial intelligence to figure out whether or not the photographs they put up are working for you because they see which ones people click through on. So if you go to Google Images and type in photograph of a puppy, these would come up. However, you would notice that the ones in blue, one is upside down, one's an illustration, that's not a photograph, and the one over there is of a wolf. Well, Google uses AI to go, oh, nobody's clicking on those. Those must not be photographs of a puppy, so they stop serving them up. So that's a day-to-day example of how AI works. Now, we've talked about long-term strategic. Let's keep going and talk about something called experiential marketing. Now, if you're trying to figure out how to get more of your consumers to stay loyal to your brand, one of the things that a lot of businesses are doing here in Sao Paulo, as well as other parts of the world, is they're doing things that are more experiential in nature. Because remember that second problem we talked about, which was that the quality of attention was decreasing because people are on their cell phones, they're doing WhatsApp, they're watching TV, they're doing all this stuff. Well, experiential marketing goes to the other side of that equation and shows you a way to engage people and have a relationship with them so that they then go in and embrace your brand. Let's talk about what I'm talking about. So the action step is to use experiential marketing to build a deeper relationship with consumers. We know about the sales funnel. We start at the top of the sales funnel when we are introduced to a brand, and we move down the sales funnel where we purchase that product. And the approach is we get awareness, then we have knowledge about the brand, then we have liking, then we have preference, then we have conviction, and finally we go to purchase. It's the sales funnel that's used and has been being used for the last 70 years to describe what we do. So typically what we do is we use TV to build awareness. Let's say we want to sell cars. Well, we do TV to get people aware of our brand. Then somebody gets aware of it, and we use newspaper to drill down and help them understand things a little better. We use magazines. We then use digital advertising to drive them to our website, where they're now going, I'm definitely going to buy a Toyota, and ultimately they go to the store and purchase it. So this has been going on forever. The problem with the traditional sales funnel is that it actually doesn't describe all of the ways that we buy products. Sometimes we start in the middle of the sales funnel and go up and then buy things down at the bottom. Sometimes, how many people in here, raise your hand if you've ever been at the grocery store and you've had an impulse buy? In other words, you're at the checkout line, right? And you're like, oh, I need razors. I'm going to get razors. Or I want that gum. I've never tried that gum. Raise your hand if you've done that. Should be everybody in here, right? Absolutely. Well, what we've done is we've gone to the bottom of the sales funnel, bought the product, and then maybe we go to the top and start all over again. So the sales funnel doesn't give us a 100% accurate idea of how people actually buy products and services. So in order to overcome that, what we need to do is use experiential marketing to become part of the consumer's life and weave our brand into the fabric of the consumer's life by doing things that are experiential in nature. Instead of interrupting a consumer with a sales pitch, experiential marketing weaves the brand into the fabric of the consumer's life. Red Bull does this. They don't interrupt your life with a 30-second TV commercial. What they do is Red Bull weaves itself into your life through events, sports team ownerships, music, and sports endorsements. And in fact, there are other brands who do this too. Swatch, 19 Crimes, Nike. We're going to talk about Nike in a second in Sao Paulo and what they did here. Here's an example of traditional marketing for Swatch. I came out of the traditional marketing world. I used to go to clients like Swatch, and I'd say, oh, we put a billboard at the top of a building, and every day 70,000 people walk by that billboard. And we would tell the client that that was a good thing. But everybody in this room knows that if you have a billboard for Swatch at the top of a building, you're not paying attention to that billboard. We may have 70,000 people who walk by it, and I can tell you right now, 70,000 people ignored that billboard. So in the old days, this is what we would do. But Swatch went out and they said, let's do something more experiential in nature that will capture people's attention and weave our brand into the fabric of the consumer's life. And here's what they did. Check this out. This is a real billboard. This is a real watch on the side of a building in Germany. So now what happens is you're walking by and you're sitting there and you're going to work and you go, oh, wow, look at that. And you stand there for a minute and you're like, that's really cool. And then you realize it actually tells time and you go in and you say, oh, it's 11:30. I'm late for the meeting. I better get to the office. So you go to the office, right? What do you do when you get to the office? The very first thing you do is you go, hey, did you see that big, huge Swatch on the side of the building? And he goes, yeah, I saw it. Did you see that thing? And, yeah, I saw it. Well, now suddenly we've woven the brand into the fabric of my life by making it experiential in nature instead of passive. So don't be passive, be experiential. Now, Nike did something right here in Sao Paulo with graffiti, where they got street artists to go in here in Sao Paulo and add Nike shoes onto some of the characters that they painted on the street art. And what ended up happening in Sao Paulo is that it was more engaging. And what happened is that they also geolocated where that art was. And if you took your smartphone and actually went to where the art had been updated with the shoes, you could purchase the shoes right there. And the only place you could purchase it was where the street art had been updated with the shoes. The result was a 32% increase in sales for Nike in Sao Paulo. So it was a very, very successful campaign. Why? Because instead of doing something passive, they did something experiential, which made people engage with the brand, and it worked out better for them. So we've talked about this 4 quadrants. We're going to now move to the next quadrant, which is strategic and short-term. These are big picture things you can do quickly in order to build a bridge between you and your consumer. Here's an action step. Appeal to all segments by using the aspiration line. What's the aspiration line? Every single person in this room has an aspiration line, and you may not know it. Every human being on the planet has an aspiration line. And here's what it is. We all aspire to be a better version of ourselves, right? All of us feel like we're here, but that someday we're going to be here. We're going to be a better version of ourselves. And so when we buy furniture at a furniture store, what are we really buying? Are we buying a chair? No, we're buying a leather sofa that we can sit in and read the newspaper in, because that's what we aspire to be. When we buy a new car, do we buy a worse car as we get older? Do we buy a cheaper car? No, we buy a more expensive car because it reflects our aspiration line. Even when we go in, and everybody in here does this almost every day, you walk into Starbucks and you buy an expensive cup of coffee. Why? Because Starbucks represents the person you aspire to be. So the aspiration line is where we can go, and if we use that as the foundation, then we can always sell things to people in a better, more effective manner because we're appealing to their aspiration line. So all of us in this room use an aspiration line as the foundation of your marketing campaigns, and then you can build the segments on top of it. These are VALS segment, V-A-L-S, and they're VALS segments that are basically designed to help us understand the psychographics of people as they go through things. Let's keep going. Now we're going to move on to something that is in the tactical and long term. These are the other action steps you can take. Heinz went in and they said, hey, guess what? We're going to use Instagram in order to create awareness for Heinz by going out and creating a campaign where if you text us and you see the Heinz products that were there on Instagram, we will take a hamburger that looks like the Instagram post directly to your house. So it was a great way to kind of stir the pot and get people engaged with the brand. They had an 11% increase in brand awareness here in Sao Paulo, Heinz did, once they did this. So it was one way to do a small thing, because think about it, they gave the hamburgers away to people in a 1 kilometer radius. That's not a lot of people, but they amplified what they did. They talked about it a lot, so that got a lot of people interested in the campaign and increased the awareness for Heinz by 11% versus the year before. So now let's go down to tactical and short term. These are things that you can do immediately, starting tomorrow, that you can do. Here's an action step for you. Understand the difference between breadth of engagement and depth of engagement. All of us in this room go in and we understand that, hey, how's your marketing campaign going? Well, the good news is I'm using all of these different things: social media, paid search, display, TV, radio, live chat, content marketing. That's breadth of engagement. That's how wide it is. That's good, but we forget that what we want to do is go deep in each one of these things. So instead of just going very lightly with small campaigns, what we need to do is select some and go deep and really do a good job with each one of those campaigns. So what you can do when you're thinking about your own campaigns, you can do your segments over on the left-hand side. Here's 4 different marketing segments that we have. And then you think about what channels each one of the segments is going to respond best to. So in segment 1, we see that they respond best to display, live chat, email, and outdoor. But segment 2 responds better to TV and radio and social media and display and live chat and a few other things. So be thinking about your own campaigns in this way so that you can understand how to use them and how to go deep as well as wide when you're doing your campaigns. Here's another action step. Leverage big data to hyper-target your campaigns. Here's a fascinating thing. I don't know about you guys, but I love astronomy. I literally had a telescope. I used to look through it. As an adult, I had one, and it was beautiful. And I'd look at these little dots of light. It's amazing how much you can learn, how much astronomers can learn just for a tiny little dot of light. Here is all the information we can learn about a star just by looking at one little dot of light. It's amazing to think of all of this information is available to us. What the chemical composition is, how old it is when it'll die, whether there are black holes nearby, how old it is compared to the universe. All of these things are available just by looking at one dot of light. And in looking at that dot of light for me, I thought this is very similar to what we can do with people, because we can understand a lot about a person and then start tracking the data across all the people who share similar traits. Here's what I mean by that. This is a gentleman right here. He looks kind of sad, actually. We can know where they shop for groceries, what they watch on TV, whether they prefer Coca-Cola or Guanara. Say that out loud for me. How do you say it? Guarana. Okay, excellent. Where they went on vacation, what their credit score is, where they bank, what kind of car they drive. All of this data is available to us because we can get that data from data companies. Well, what's interesting is when you connect that data to all the other people and have all the data from all the other people, suddenly you start seeing data sets that are out there, and you start realizing we can manipulate this data in a certain way so that we can target people in a certain way that works out great and works out better for us because we're connecting the dots. So as you're thinking about what to do next, start thinking about big data and how to use big data in order to target people and hyper-target them. Hyper-targeting means we're going to send the right ad to the right person at the right time with the right message. When you do that, you'll start seeing your sales and revenues go up. Here are a few key thoughts I want you to remember as we go through things. One is that everybody in this room who's in marketing is thinking about their creative campaigns that they're doing. And sometimes we want to do campaigns that are a little bit risky, and other times we want to do things that are a little safer. The risky campaigns, it's a little bit like the stock market. If you take a risk in a marketing campaign, you have the potential for it to absolutely go through the roof and do a good job for you, but you also have the potential that it might fail. So in the stock market, you take risks and you might have a big win, but you might also have a big failure, or you can be conservative and know that you'll have a certain outcome. Well, here's a way to look at it. You can use game theory, or you can use this 2x2 in order to understand what to do. There's risky on the left, there's safe on the right. The targeting is narrow at the bottom and broad at the top. So here's what I mean by this. If you want to take a look at a campaign that goes out to a big, broad audience, you want to be where this X is, on the safe side of the equation. If I'm doing a TV campaign that's going to appeal to everybody in Brazil, I want to make sure that the campaign is safe, it has some good creative product to it, but is also a little bit safe. If I want to take a risk with something and do something a little edgy, then what I'm going to do is be on the bottom left and narrow my focus. Because if the focus is narrower and there's a certain segment of my audience who is focused, that campaign's focused on, and it fails, it's not as big a problem as if I fail on a big scale. So another way to look at it is to use game theory to help predict outcomes. Here's the launch of your campaign on the left. On the right-hand side is time as you go along. And if you're thinking about, should we take this risk with this campaign? It's very innovative and it's very risky. Here's what you can do. If you have success, it looks like this. If you have failure, it might look like this. The difference between these two is when you're looking at the campaign and the campaign runs, what you can say is, if it runs, we have a greater chance for success than we do for failure. In other words, if we win big. If we fail, we stop the campaign and turn it off. So what you would do is go to this dotted line, run the campaign for a little bit, see if you're starting to trend on the successful side. If you are, keep going and you'll be in the blue section. But if you start seeing that it's a problem with the campaign because you're saying something that's a little bit edgy and a little bit innovative and makes some people a little uncomfortable, then you cut the campaign off and say, we're going to stop here. So you can use game theory in order to understand how to move forward with your marketing campaigns. Here's a final thought. It's good to understand these concepts, but if you want to be successful, you need to take action. Remember when I started out, I said everybody in here has the same problems in Sao Paulo as we have in Amsterdam and London and Dubai and all these other places I speak. The difference between people who succeed and people who don't are the people in this audience are going to go back to their office and apply some of what we learned today to your business tomorrow so that you can learn from this and then take action on it. So I'm going to encourage you to take action and think about 3 or 4 things that you learned here today that you can take action on so that we can then improve your sales and marketing and grow your business.